Thank you for joining us this morning for another edition of Stump the Archivist from Washington State Archives. We'll be doing a similar webinar every month. We're taking a summer break, but picking back up in September, we'll do a Stump the Archivist webinar every month on the third Friday. So join us for future webinars too. No two webinars are going to be the same. Research Archivist Tracy Rebstock is our host, and she'll be hosting all these Stump the Archivist webinars for the foreseeable future. This is primarily a Q&A session, which will start after Tracy does a little talk about public health records. After that, feel free to chime in with any questions. Start thinking of your questions now. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them into the group chat. If you don't see the chat, there is a little icon on the bottom right of your screen that says chat. You click on that, it'll pop up the chat. And in that, enter your questions. You'll find links to stuff that we talk about during this webinar. It's a helpful little feature, so be sure you're paying attention to the chat. And you can also ask your questions out loud without putting them in the chat if you prefer to just talk and ask the question. That is no problem. There's a little hand raising icon on the bottom, about the bottom middle of your screen. It's a little picture of a hand. If you click on that, you'll raise your hand and we'll call on you. Other than that, yeah, go ahead and put your questions in the chat and I'll read the questions out for you. And without further ado, Tracy, take it away.
All right, thank you, Jameson. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to see everyone today. And like Jameson said, we're thinking about taking a summer break, and it's just a short break, two months basically. And then we'll resume in September, and then we'll have some alerts and things out for you. During this, while I'm doing this talking portion, I'm going to ask everyone to mute your screens just so there's no feedback while I'm talking. And then once I get done, I will invite you to unmute and you can ask questions. We had a request last time to talk about specifically the 1918 flu epidemic, and then less specifically about public health records. And this is a question we do get periodically. It was probably, I've now been here 10 years. Sometimes it feels like time is both like been a really long time and then also super short. So I received a research question not long after I started from a woman who works in Pacific County, and they had a small outbreak of Legionnaire's disease. And she was curious about finding records about that time, mostly because she'd had to be hospitalized along with a few other teachers. It was involved with the school, and it was in the, I think it was like early 80s, I think is when this happened. Early 1980s is when this happened. And it was interesting because I had never actually considered what records might be around for something like that, where somebody would be like, was there anything that shows that this even happened? Is there anything about it? Now, for the most part, medical records don't live a long time. There are some exceptions, of course, but for the most part, I think 10 years maybe. And you can talk to your local health provider to just get an idea of like how long, because sometimes people are like, well, surely my medical record just like stays forever. But then you ask yourself, why do you have to fill out a huge like book form of everything that's ever happened to you if it did in fact exist? And so sometimes I think if you have the same doctor for many years, you might have your medical records for a long period of time, but for a lot of reasons, it's not. Now, what happens is the Department of Health does collect statistics about outbreaks of diseases in different areas, and that has changed over time for sure. But in this particular case, I was only able to find some records in the Department of Health. They have an epidemiology division, statistics, disease files, studies, and plans. And basically, it is primarily about the prevention of mass disease, but it also collects files on different diseases over time and different little outbreaks that happen, but it does not include specific patient information. It's more statistical, and what they would do is collect the information from all the counties in Washington, and then they would disseminate that into a report that would say, here's all the different diseases, and here's how many cases of each disease in each county. And if you look at how they've tracked how the Department of Health has tracked the coronavirus, you can see that that's a very different collection device as far as it has real time. It updates statistics on a regular basis. Whereas back in the 1980s and even before that, it was more like it took time before they actually got their information together. Now, for the 1918 influenza, there were some things that came out from the Department of Health, but it was often suggestions. And so I'm going to show a picture really quickly. One of my colleagues at the beginning of the coronavirus actually went and started doing some research because there was a lot of comparisons to the 1918 influenza to this space. And so he did a little research, and he found a Dr. Tuttle, which I'm going to show you a picture of him real quick. Let me see if I can share my screen. Here he is. Not that one. There we go. Can you guys see Dr. Tuttle there? Hopefully somebody give me a thumbs up that that's what you see, hopefully. Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. So this is what was posted on our social media. This was a doctor who was around during the time of the Spanish influenza in 1918, and he basically had a listing, and there, next to his image is a excerpt from the Seattle Star, October 5th, 1918, and it gave a list of rules for the public to follow in order to try to prevent the spread of the infection. And you'll, if you can see it, you can also, and thank you, Sarah, for showing the blog post as well from, I think the state library did one as well. So it kind of showcases a lot of our resources that we have about the records from like a public health standpoint. The other thing that was found, I think I can pull this up, is the city of Raymond issued a listing for quarantine, a quarantine in 1918, October 7th, 1918. And so sometimes you'll find this public records, the public health records at the local level. If the cities and towns, they would meet, you could read their minutes, you can see what their ordinances or resolutions were at the time. And often they were receiving information. If they had a local health district, they would be receiving some things, for some recommendations. So I've been working on some things with Spokane Parks, and the park department actually also put out a notice based on some advice they had received that nobody should be in the public parks or sharing like playground equipment and stuff like that in 1918 as well. And then I'm going to show you, let me go out of that. Back to the regular screen, and I'm going to share one other image. So if you do a search for influenza on our digital archives, you can see this image. And this is the Seattle police in 1918 wearing a mask. And since Sarah mentioned the blog post, I'm going to pull that up as well. Watch me. Watch me do a search without her link. See how good I do. Corner. And here's the, this showcases the state library's digital collections. And I was going to say one of the best resources for looking for things like this is the newspaper, the local newspapers. And thankfully, a lot of the newspapers from this time were digitized. So through a Library of Congress Chronicling America project, where they digitized a lot of the smaller newspapers in many different states. And then our state library has a digitizing newspapers project going on as well. I'm going to show you links to that, but this is kind of the example there. And then I wanted to also mention that some of this stuff can be found in the governor's record. So basically anything that happened across the nation also happened in Washington, and often the way those records end up appearing is in the governor's record because people are writing to him to find out what are they going to do care of this. There's can be some correspondence that you can see that can start on a base level, and then the Department of Health's board minutes would also talk about this as well. So there's a lot of different ways to go into that. And again, I was not able to find anything for this woman who was looking for the Legionnaire's disease, but I was able to find mention of it, reports about it. It did show a spike, as Legionnaire's disease hadn't been something that was on anyone's mind at the time. And so they show that in Pacific County, there were some cases, and that showed up in a report. So we were able to piece together a few little things to kind of showcase her experience at that time. So does anybody have any questions about public health records in particular, or anything I've just covered that you'd like to see again? I did want to show before we dive out, I do want to show the newspaper links. So let me show that real quick. And then let's see. So here's the Secretary of State's State Library Washington digital newspapers, and it's got a nice, easy URL, washingtondigitalnewspapers.org. You can take a look and see what different collections they have here. And then also Chronicling America, if you're searching US wide, most of these, they're doing a project, at least at this point, there are some done 1777 to 1963, and then you can select a state to find out what they have going in our state, and you can just search to see which newspapers they have. This is especially good for finding the smaller newspapers. And if you don't have any questions about public health records or anything else, feel free to start asking questions, and let me know where you're working, what sort of research you're working on, and where you're getting hung up, and I'll try to assist. You can unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can hit the little raise your hand bit. Thank you, Linda. Let me know if I can ever share any other website resources, and I'll have Jameson put the links in the marker. I see Susan, do you have a question?
I just came into a flash drive of amazing photos in Okanagan and Chelan County in the 1920s to 1950s, actually. I have talked to the Wenatchee Genealogical Society and the Okanagan Genealogical Society about providing them these photos, and we'll be meeting with both of those in the next month. But if you don't know who took the pictures, they're just on a flash drive. The man who gave them to me has since died. I know that they basically are focused on his mother, who was a school teacher from the very early time in Okanagan County. But how do you give attribution? How do you use sources if you don't know who took the pictures?
That's a really good question, Susan. And I would say the best thing is honesty. Honesty is the best policy, right? So I would say the best thing to do is please, if you know anything about the people in the pictures or the time frame, or you've already said that it's from Okanagan and, did you say Chelan counties?
Wenatchee, yes.
Wenatchee, okay. And it has to do with school teacher, so like it's definitely always good to say what you do know. You can also talk about how you receive them. It's always good to talk about provenance. That's what we use in archives language, is trying to trace as much as we can who had them, when they had them, and as much information as you know to attribute. And then also ask for help. That's something that a lot of places are doing now. They used to, back in ye old Flickr days, Flickr isn't really around so much anymore. It seems kind of funny to say that, but they used to do crowdsourcing, the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian. They would say, hey, I have these images, but we don't know much about them. And they would give at least what they did know, and then ask people to say, hey, do you recognize any of these people? Hey, do you know where this was taken? It's amazing. When I volunteered as a student intern at the Museum of Arts and Culture in Spokane, we had a gentleman who worked there, and he was really good at looking at pictures of anything shot in Spokane, and could basically tell you exactly what part of Spokane it was and when, almost. Just because he grew up there, you know, he was in his 80s, he knew every little stretch. He worked in the parks for many years, so he knew a lot of the different landscapes and stuff. And so there are people out there who can help. Another thing that people do is if they're at a historical society or genealogical society, they can actually, when it feels safer, sometimes they will have an event where they will print some of the images out, put them on the table, and have people come through and identify, leave post-its or have little notes about where they think who the different people are and where they're from or where it's located, just to kind of help people marry the information back up with the image.
So yes, I was hoping both the Wenatchee and the Okanagan, you know, genealogical people could do some of that. But are these something that the Digital Archives Washington would be interested in?
So I would say that we do host images, but they're ones that we own in our own collections, and we are primarily a local government. But the Washington State Library has what they call a rural heritage collection.
Yes.
And Evan Robb, he's really good about working with small collections like that. And I don't know if Sarah, if you're still on here and will you pop a link to Rural Heritage or Evan's contact, because he might be a good resource for that as well.
You said Evan Ross, is that his name?
Evan Robb. And his email is now in the chat if you wanted to email him.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. Good question. Anyone else today? Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
Hi. So, you know, with census records and other things, there's like a lag for obvious reasons about, you know, like when they become public. What's the situation like that with the sort of, I don't know, current COVID records and things? I guess maybe they're all anonymized anyway. So just sort of wondering about like that project of the archives and how you're collecting all of that that's happening kind of and been happening.
That is a very good question. Actually, we have been working with the Department of Health to talk about what records we are interested in keeping, along with other counties who have been keeping records. They did update our records retention schedule that's available online, that talk a little bit about the public health records, especially if there was an epidemic, and what that looks like and what sorts of records we are looking to hold. And then since a lot of these are digital, we are working with the agencies to transfer their digital records. Now, they do have a certain amount of time they are kept with the agency for general purposes before they are transferred to us. But in this case, as soon as COVID started, we started working with different agencies, Clark County in particular, Thurston County, and the Department of Health, in anticipating what sorts of records we're going to want once those records meet retention, and then we will start the process of ingesting those in. Debbie Bond at our Digital Archives has been working with them about looking at the particulars of what that would look like. Some of the stuff that's up on the web, our Digital Archives was born in 2004, and it has made a lot of great advances as far as technology is concerned, but in many ways, a lot of times, as technology changes over time, we do have to kind of update, and that takes a little bit of time as well. So this is giving us some time to kind of look at what types of records will be coming in and what formats they'll be coming in, and then kind of preparing that for when the time comes and they transfer. That's a really good question. So, and then the other thing is that there are other times in our history that they've had various outbreaks in different areas of the state of Washington. And often it's the county level, the county health is where we get some of those things. More details at the county level or the local city level, if the city has a health department. than we do at the state level, because the state level is just keeping that they may receive more detailed reports, but they disseminate it into a more broad statistical output, that rather than keeping the very specifics of how many people and when. They go by how many people in what county, not necessarily what region of the county. Good question. Yes, Jane.
Has there been new interest in the records from the Spanish flu era now that we're in a second pandemic?
Absolutely. More people have been asking about it for sure. It's interesting because there was a lot of curiosity about, well, what happened then and how did they handle it? Because it was a big deal in 1918, 1917, 1918, 1919, when that was happening, especially at the thick of it. And so a lot of people were wondering what actually happened then. So we had a chance, both the state library and the state archives, to kind of go digging to see what sort of things we may have that have to do with it, and kind of how people were handling it back then.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I will say they closed a lot of theaters and, like closed public events and stuff like that back in 1918.
Yes, I've read some really interesting articles about things that happened then, including the Stanley Cup playoffs, which ended up being Seattle was in them back with the Metropolitans back then, and apparently it was 1919, and they thought everything was over, and it wasn't, and it got really bad.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right, to see how
Yes,
that
it
all
is.
plays out. Yeah.
I think that even a player and a coach on the Montreal team died during the finals. That's what ultimately canceled the Stanley Cup finals. And they called it a tie.
Exactly. Thank you. And thank you for helping me get in, Jameson.
Yeah, of course.
And I will just say that you don't have to ask questions about public health or health concerns. I know that that's kind of a deep topic, and it's also, maybe a little too close to home. So we can definitely talk about other things if you have other pressing questions, research that you're working on, or things that you're just curious about. And if nobody comes up with questions, I can fill the space with what I'm working on research-wise right now to see if that gives you some ideas. So I'll take a pause and see if anybody else has any questions. Well, I will fill the space with a couple things that I'm working on at the current moment with some different researchers. So one of the most interesting research requests that I've received as of late is I have a gentleman who's stationed at Fort Lewis McChord. He's in the Army, and he collects uniforms. And what he likes to do when he does collect uniforms, he actually does specifically collect uniforms from a specific area in World War II. And so when he's able to get a hold of one, he does the research to try to figure out who wore the uniform, and tries to trace all their different all the different stars and bars that they have on their coats and jackets and things. And it's really interesting to meet him. He came in and did some in-person research. He usually does a lot of his research in St. Louis at the military archives there for the National Archives, but he came in to look at our veterans bonus records. They do have a set of index cards that come with them, but some of they were filmed on fiche, and sometimes if you can't read the numbers, it does not allow you access to the hundreds of reels of microfilm that we have for each of those individuals, which usually includes their application for a bonus, and then it will sometimes give their DD 214, their discharge papers, and maybe a couple certificates about their time in service. And so he came in and did some research on that, was telling me a little bit about his research, which I thought was very fascinating, a little different than how people normally use our bonus records. Usually what they're doing is they are tracing a loved one to be able to put, to memorialize them on their, in their last place of rest in the cemetery, or they're trying to get them buried in a military cemetery, and they're tracking their service. So that was really interesting. Any other? Okay, go ahead, Jane.
Can you tell us more about those bonus records?
So we have these bonus records. They are for people who would have served in the World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. And once they were home and discharged, they would have applied for benefits. And this would have been their application for benefits. And then often it'll say like if they received like a one-time payment or if they got a regular payment, and if they couldn't receive their payment, who the next of kin would be. So the index cards themselves are really interesting. They have a lot of information on them. And like I said, they are on fiche, which does make them a little more challenging to image. And like I said, the images themselves sometimes are not really great because if they don't show the application number, then you can't find the application in the film. That's the only way to find it. There's no paper version of this record anywhere. And so we carry indexes for them. And then we also carry the reels of film that have the actual long, but they are in numeric order. So they're not, there's no way to search them alphabetically or anything like that. You have to go into the fiche to be able to find what's in the film. And a lot of people use them. We mostly work with our Department of Veterans Affairs to work with those records, but they are open to some degree to the public. It depends a lot on what information is included. So if people are still alive and the Social Security numbers are on them, then those are not open to the public. But if they are deceased, then they are open to the public. So
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions today?
Well, we could flip the script a little bit, and since we have a lot of genealogy researchers here, let me ask a question that's not exactly a research question for an archivist, but asking someone who spends a lot of time doing genealogy. My mom has been looking for some cousins, living cousins, from a part of the family that kind of broke off from our part of the family a couple generations ago. And she finally did find a bunch of cousins last year, but they have basically no interest in meeting our side of the family. So, do any genealogists here have any advice about how to engage these people or convince them that it might be a good idea to at least have a phone call or a cup of coffee or something?
That's a really good question. Here I am saying exactly what Tracy says every time. I don't know unless you can somehow come up with some kind of family story or photographs or something that would engage their interest, something that they might not know about, maybe a connection to a famous person. Just, it's really hard to know. There's a lot of people who have no interest in family history. And so it's hard to get them, to try and get them to engage.
Okay, some good advice. That was the only question that I had. All right, well, if nobody else has anything, then yeah, I guess this is going to be us signing off for the summer. We're going to be taking a summer break and we'll be back in September, or at least that's the tentative plan. If we change our mind about any of those things, it will be in the newsletter. We'll let you know if we're going to pick back up again sooner or wait an extra month or whatnot. So thank you everybody for joining us. And thanks to those of you who have joined us for a bunch of these. We look forward to seeing you in September. Have
All right.
a wonderful summer.
Sounds great. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everyone popping in, and we'll see you in September.
Thank you.